Okay, everybody, how's it going? I've got scholarly playboy here with me again, Mr. Terry Wolfe, and we're going to basically talk about MGS4. Moreover, in reaction to a video that I saw that was actually linked on his site, metagearsolid.org, which had an interesting video
Yeah.
called In Defense of Metal Gear Solid 4. If you've ever seen any of Terry's articles, he criticized MGS4 in a way that really spoke to me. It's the kind of critique I was looking for that mattered. So what we're going to do is talk about MGS4 and kind of respond to the video a little bit as well. So would you like to say or add anything to that, Terry?
Yeah, just that the video is only posted on July 30th, so it was only posted like 2 days ago. And then that alone struck me as being kind of noteworthy because it's 2017 and it's like I keep noticing articles coming up defending Metal Gear games like 10, 15 years after the fact. Like I don't understand. Like
Yeah.
the game came out in 2008. I don't know. I think everything that needs to be said about whether it was a good game or not has been settled. But you know, there's nothing wrong with making a video. Obviously, later, my whole site is based on going back and re-examining them. But this video didn't seem to really re-examine or unearth anything different than what the initial praise for the game was when it came out. It got like perfect scores from everybody. Like it got I think it got 10 out of 10 from like IGN and stuff. So the video comes out now and makes it sound like everybody hates Metal Gear Solid 4. Like it's a mixed opinion at best whether people love that game or was disappointed by it. But where does that need to defend it come from at this point?
I'm thinking it's because people, from what I gather, Metal Gear Solid 5, it's a good game, but it's not a very good Metal Gear Solid game.
Okay.
That's the general consensus from some of my friends.
Yeah, I would have to agree that it doesn't fit what people think of as Metal Gear Solid. So that's what triggers like going back and saying, yeah, we should appreciate Metal Gear Solid 4 more because Metal Gear Solid 5 broke away from tradition or something like that.
That could be it. I mean, yeah, I think I was going to raise that. I remember being subscribed to, I actually got a year's subscription to official PlayStation Magazine UK when I was like 14, back when people actually bought magazines, because the internet wasn't as streamlined back then. It was starting to be. I got Star Letter and won a year's free subscription, and I remember the Metal Gear Solid 4 issue coming out, and I remember when I was like 12 through to 14 playing all of the Metal Gear Solid games 1, 2, and 3, and I loved them, man. I loved every single one of them.
Yeah.
And I spent so much time playing them because they were so well done, and I was really excited for MGS4. And I kind of realized that it got perfect 10s, but I remember people being really angry, like if anyone scored it less than a 10.
Right.
And I kind of relate this back to like, you know when the Phantom Menace first came out?
Kind of, yeah.
Like
I didn't follow that, but I do remember that the Star Wars community was like holding the critics hostage.
Yeah. And like if anyone, when it first came out, the critics scored that film really highly, and then, but when the originals came out, people would be like, if someone told you that one day there will be a bunch of bad Star Wars movies, they'd be like, get the fuck out of here. So it's a bit of this sort of, when you generate so much hype, because as far as everyone knew, this was the last game that was going to be released.
I guess that's what I always forget, because yeah, it's like all signs pointed to this being the last one, and it was the most believable conclusion that you could get. Even though Metal Gear Solid 3 had set up, you know, Big Boss or whatever, that was kind of just considered at the time to be like a freak deviation from the Solid Snake story. And so for Solid Snake to be old and clearly on his last legs here was like, this is it. So this is like Kojima's farewell. We don't know what he's going to do after this. So yeah, that must explain a lot of the mentality at the time more than anything.
Yeah. And one thing I want to say, before we respond to the video, like I don't hate this guy. I think his video was actually really quite well done.
Yeah, it's not a bad video.
Yeah, no, it's a well done video. But of course, I do disagree, and I think part of it comes from he very much sort of gets what they were trying to do with the game, and he tries to sort of sell the good concepts, and kind of works in a little bit of confirmation bias, but kind of ignores a lot of the execution. I don't think you should have to think so hard to like defend something and saying this is what they were trying to do. That's how it comes off, and I feel like he frames the video game itself very falsely. Like, we are talking about a 10-year-old game here, like, well, nearly 10 years, but like, I'm not gonna lie, when I first played MGS4, like the week it came out, back then I thought the gameplay and mechanics and like the general design overhaul were pretty broken. So I wonder what you think about that.
When I first played the game, I play a Metal Gear game for the first time with a 100% completely open mind, and I want to learn what it is trying to do, because even the first Metal Gear Solid game that I played, like, there has never been a Metal Gear Solid where I've picked it up and it has been intuitive. It has always been a huge learning curve. Like, Metal Gear Solid 1 was, granted, I was like whatever 12 or whatever when I first played it, but it was very awkward. And compared to what I was playing on like the PC and other action games, it felt like a kind of a strange Japanese interpretation of what an action game, a stealth action game would be. And then it's everything else that carries it forward and makes it enjoyable. And then you get used to the controls, and then by the time you're done, it's like you mastered it and it's everything works. But Metal Gear Solid 4, so Metal Gear Solid 4 was kind of obviously, it used the buttons in a way that, your hands are way more active. It's not a simple game to control. And so there was some getting used to there. I didn't enjoy the setting. I didn't enjoy the themes. I didn't enjoy the the whole mood is completely depressed. Obviously, it starts in a graveyard. I mean, it's it's not there to be fun. Even when the gameplay, you take the gameplay, you remove it, you put it in like a VR missions thing where you're just, shooting targets or something. That could be fun controls, but everything that would normally be like fun is now bittersweet and sad.
It's a slog, yeah. And yeah, like the guy talked about like epic connotations that like really drive you forward. Like in MGS1 in particular, and MGS2 and 3, like everything you do has this tension to it. You're like, oh fuck, oh they're gonna find me if I. So you really, really felt the tension, and I never felt that in MGS4. Like, he's trying to sell this really jaded, uninvested experience, and like trying to compare it, and I just didn't feel any weight to a lot of the things that were happening in the game.
Well, give some examples of that, because I have such a messed up view of the Metal Gear series by now by analyzing it so much that I'm curious what just the straight up reaction of these situations were in the game, because I was already coming into it with like a theory that maybe it's like all VR and it's like it's subverting your expectations in 100 different ways, and like I was already deep into analyzing this stuff on a different level. So what is just like some situations, because I remember like they don't have the alarm sort of like Metal Gear Solid 1, you get caught, you hear that sound, music starts going, boom, everybody starts flooding in. It's like it's a totally different setup when you get caught by a guard or something in this game.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'll say is that from the get-go in MGS4, I had no idea where I was, and this is a hard concept to explain, but I'll try. So like in certain setups, like in MGS1, for instance, the world isn't that far away from our own. So we don't necessarily have to see all of it. It feels very naturalistic and grounded in certain ways. And then we're just sort of told in MGS4 what's going on, but we're never really shown it. We never experience what the world's like in the same way. MGS2 and MGS3 as well, they're all alternate history. Or like alternate near future, but you get a sense of the world. It's not so drastically different to the point where they'd actually have to show a lot more of the world off.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
And whenever, again, you mentioned like that panic button, when you get caught in MGS1, you're like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Because, you know, you really panic. The alert's going off. You feel tense because you'll die a few times. You know, you're harder than most humans, but you're still human. Whereas the basic physics engine in 4 and the way that the levels were structured and the lack of emotional investment, even in that first level, just really didn't make me care. And then I feel like some would argue, well, that's what Kojima wanted, because he was so, like, he was jaded and, like, he wasn't invested. So I'm like, yeah, okay, but that doesn't make the game fun to play, and it doesn't necessarily make it work. So, like, whenever you come across a boss, he mentioned the charismatic bosses. Absolutely. You every fight you're in, you feel like it's a fight for your life. And MGS4 just feels like this slog for all the wrong reasons and not what would actually embody the metaphor that he was going for.
Man, that is such an interesting way of looking at it, because, you know, I obviously have the same criticisms, but, you know, I'm used to looking at it from the point of view that, you know, this is what Kojima wanted to do, and that on some level he's subverting the fun for the sake of trying to make a point. And this guy, see, I disagree with the guy's video. He's arguing that the bittersweetness of it and all that, he calls it all epic. And he says, like, you know, it's epic when he does this. And I guess that's the thing, is we all see the same thing, right? We all see and agree that the game is not trying to be cool or fun, and that the, like, cool in the sense of like Metal Gear Solid 1 was cool, like iconic and catchy. Like, it's not nothing here is catchy. It's just
no.
It might be.
You can pick up MGS1 today, and it's still just intense as atmospheric as it was 20 years ago.
Right, and this is like, you have to, like, explain shit to even, you know, get somebody into the idea of playing in this world where, like, it would not be hard to inject something bright or you know, easy to latch onto. Like Drebin, like, seriously,
that was stupid. That was so stupid.
The whole thing with the monkey is like, that idea. Okay, so that's, for me, that's basically where the game totally broke into self-parody. And it's like the monkey with a diaper smoking cigarettes is such a farcical, shitty idea, especially in a war-torn, you know, cynical. If you're going to go cynical, there's a way of doing it that becomes like a noir sort of, like, artistic, gritty thing. And your character, you know, the main character becomes this sort of, you know, the detective who's, like, making these sarcastic remarks about how shitty everything is and this kind of stuff. But this is kind of just an open wound. It's just a painful thing. Snake is, like, sucks, and he's, you know, he doesn't suck because he's bad. He sucks because he's just suffering and miserable, and he doesn't want to do his own mission.
I'll tell you another reason why it may piss people off, where we're told that Drebins are everywhere, but we're never shown it.
Yeah.
Right? And also, it's really little things that start to soil the experience, right? The codec, for instance. You call Otacon, and the codec is such a major part of the other games. Like, you don't want to do anything without you know, you don't want to miss anything that happens on the codec, because some of the best bits of the gameplay are on there. And that idea of having your mission support video, you know, video chat like Discord or Skype in your head is a pretty cool idea. And when you call them, you just get useless information. You just get like, you don't get any actual exposition that would help set the scene of the world that they're trying to establish now. Like, you call Otacon and he goes, "Head north, Snake!" That's your only objective. Head north! Whereas back in the day, it was, "Holy shit, there's people in the fucking elevator with you!" You know? Like, you'd have to actually work with the codec, like you know, it's on the back of the game case and all that stuff. You'd actually get useful background information that would make you feel like, yeah, I'm on this military op. And in this game, the character of Sunny as well, like, you can't even, she's meant to be this huge, beautiful human anchor in this horrible world, but you don't see any of the world. You don't even get to call this Sunny character, that little girl on the airship, you don't even get to call her on the codec to, like, save your game or even care about her. It's so misdirected.
Yeah, and in I think now this is
when you meet Meryl, you can't even call her on the codec. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah,
sorry.
this is kind of like a leap of logic. I'm trying to, like, I'll be trying to almost play devil's advocate for Metal Gear Solid 4, but in a way that this guy does not, because we're kind of coming back to this video, but like, when you have the codec calls being sort of, I remember playing it and thinking that it was always holding back. And
yes,
that video, the videos you get when you first start, he kind of touches on them in the video, but those commercials, you know, the commercials for the different PMCs and the commercials for the TV shows and the commercials for like the talk show with David Hayter and stuff, that's as close as you get to seeing the world. And so he tries to anticipate that in this video and say, "Oh no, you do get to see what the world is like." And it's like, really? We get to see what?
Barely see any of it when the game starts. It's really confusing, and you skip through half of them and have no fucking idea what's going on. You can't watch them back later. You have to, like, start a new game like 9 times to even watch them all in full.
Yeah, so you're lost. It's more confusing than anything. It doesn't clarify what the world is like. It confuses what the world is like. If they didn't show you those commercials, it would actually be easier to understand what the world is like, because when you see these guys, like, wearing, like, the game show host wearing, like, this super tacky like 1970s looking outfit, and, you know, he's laughing and everything feels so disconnected from how, you know, real life or even real TV works. And then you're supposed to just, I assume that this is, oh, the future is different than it is now, and this must be like a really crazy future. And that whole, like, the nanomachine guy,
there's no human element, is there?
That's part of it. It feels alien. Everything just feels alien to the point where you can't emotionally invest in it.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're like, well, maybe Snake's the human, but there's just so many, and in the animation as well. Like, you look at what that game was competing with, like Uncharted. Like, I remember thinking, like, the game doesn't look that good. A lot of the hair physics are very clay-like. That sounds like a little, like, arbitrary, nitpicky criticism, but it really isn't when you sort of look at the way that things sort of happen in the game.
Just look at Metal Gear Solid 3, like Eva.
Yeah.
Like, Eva's hair is, like, legendary in game, in the game industry for being, like, this actually organic looking hair on a woman for, like, the first time. And
I spent a lot of time in the Peep Show theater, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, because it's awesome.
I was like 12, give me a break.
They did the work to make it worth, you know, actually thinking, wow, this is a hot sidekick I got now.
the PS2 games, oddly enough, like the animation and the way that everything felt was more fluid than 4.
And in 4, they, I remember looking, because I followed the news leading up to Metal Gear Solid 4, obviously, and they downgraded the graphics before it was released. So there was a bunch of stuff initially that they showed that looked quite a bit better. And then by the time it came out, like Meryl's hair, I remember, because ever since 3, I've always hoped and assumed that they were gonna, whatever engine they developed, because I mean I know it takes a lot of work to develop an engine for hair physics. It's such a useless thing, but it takes a tremendous amount of work to do. And so I was always hoping they would carry it forward. It's like, you guys did the work on this at one point. Why can't you reuse that and apply it to more characters?
There was so much attention to detail in things that didn't fucking matter. Like, a lot of the extra content, or let's, for instance, like, this is hard to get across as well, but something that is very obtuse, yet very minimalistic at the same time.
Yeah, and then, so the graphics downgrade was, I mean, anyone could make the argument that the game is so ambitious and it has so much going on that that's why they couldn't, keep high quality assets, or they had to dumb it down, because Uncharted is an extremely linear, simplistic game with great animations, and it hides all of its flaws with sort of invisible walls and like linear paths that it's going through. And so you could argue that, for you have to cut something out in order to make room for that much gameplay and that much whatever.
There was the lie of an open world in 4, because it was so linear.
That's right. And that's the thing, is the game was supposed to be so open world. You're supposed to have destructible buildings. You were supposed to have psychological warfare. That was what the game was pitched as, is a game where you're going to be, at least in one of the chapters, you're going to be in a city that is almost fully destructible, and you can play mind games with all the enemies, and it'll just be a war unfolding in real time. Like, if you think about the promises, the false promises that game had, like, if you just, I feel like the guy who made this video, he just picked up the game like a year ago and he played it, and now he's talking about why it's great. It's like, no, you if you were following it, if you were a Metal Gear fan, it was 20% of what they promised, even just in terms of gameplay. It was so little compared to what it was hyped up to be.
Yeah.
When you finally got it, it's like, oh, there's like, is there even a part where there's any destructibility? It's like in a cutscene, a wall gets blown up and now you can walk through it. It's like, that's not a destructible city. In the initial showing off, there was, they were showing it off as being like a game you could play as a first person view, which I think technically can you play that game as a first person?
Not really.
I think you can move around in first person if you do the right thing, I think.
Yeah, like if you hit triangle, you sort of can, but then if you roll, like, it's a ball ache to do.
That's right.
And it doesn't advantage you in any way.
It's a complex. Everything that everything like that is complicated. It doesn't make it worth it, because the game doesn't actually. It's like, if it was an open world, the bargain that a developer makes with a player when they make something open world is that you might get lost, you might get bored, you might end up running over the same streets back and forth trying to figure out what's going on, but you will have the freedom and the time and the luxury to be able to make use of these great systems that we've created. And I felt like Metal Gear Solid 4 just gives you like a taste of this, here's a taste of that, just so that's like not false advertising. We need to include the things we told you you can do. And now the chapter's over. And now wait on this install screen for, 12 minutes while it's installing.
I completely forgot about those fucking installs.
I never forget. That's the one thing I remember. If I remember anything about Metal Gear Solid 4, it's the fucking loading screens. Not even loading screen, installation screen.
Like, The Last of Us, like, was bigger and better. I know it came out years later, but you know, there was no installs with The Last of Us.
You had to install when you first booted it up, right?
Yeah. Probably, but like I remember this was a huge problem with a lot of PS3 games actually. Like you'd have to install the game and it would take ages. And it's like I remember when I could just stick in a game and it'd play.
Yeah, and the thing that pissed me off about Metal Gear Solid 4, and again, these are the kinds of issues. I'm going to bring it back to this video again, is that these are the kinds of issues. Everything we're complaining about is stuff that this guy just doesn't even acknowledge. It's like he's talking about how it's great, but he's selectively cherry picking a couple of things that you could argue are epic and great. It's like, what about the installation screen? If anybody's gonna, that's why the perfect scores for me that the game initially got just made me laugh out loud, because it's like you cannot, nobody can argue that those installation screens are acceptable. It's the reason why.
20 minutes every chapter.
Do you know?
So if you're in like Shadow Moses and you want to go and play, like I don't know, like the second level in that kind of was it like South America or something?
Yeah.
Like if you want to go play that, you have to install the game again for like 20 minutes.
So and then what are you looking at in the meantime? Snake smoking, and like these weird disclaimers and stuff. Like they don't even do anything in the meantime to
like at least give us like a VR mission, you know, something.
A VR mission, or like think about all the complex story and world building that you could do in that 20 minutes.
Oh my god, yeah.
Like think about like, here's a timeline of what this city has been through since 2010 or whenever the last game was supposed to have taken place.
They could have a little mini game where you play like as a citizen, or like I don't know, see what Nastasha Romenko's up to.
Yeah, like there's everything that you would normally get in like a briefing file. Like, because the previous games had briefing sections where you could go. The MGS1 had the whole VHS tape interview room on the submarine. Metal Gear Solid 2 had 3, like an article and a book and stuff that you could read ahead of time. And Metal Gear Solid 3,
it had a lot of extra content actually. It had I remember it had the monkey mini game.
Yeah.
It had the viewing theater, which you wouldn't get, obviously.
Yeah, but those were
and briefings. Yeah, briefings.
That was subsistence. Is one of the extra stuff, like the monkey stuff came in. So the original game didn't have like the monkey ape escape or whatever stuff.
Okay, I remember. I must have got a later edition of it then, because I remember having Snake Eater and that being in.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know. I seem to remember that wasn't in the original.
God, you're supposed to be the guy I go to know exactly when the monkeys are in which game, and the fact that you are not an expert on Ape Escape. I'm sorry.
How am I qualified to discuss this video if I can't even remember when the Ape Escape cross promotion happened? But anyway, let's get back to the actual point if we can. So the briefing screens, the installation screens, to me that's the I'm not going to say it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. It's like the sledgehammer that broke the camel's back. It's like there's a lot of stuff that you could say just about that reflects on the decisions of that game. And because the reason why those things have to install, it's not some big, magic secret why, but you don't know how advanced this game is. Some games just are so amazing. No, it's the audio. Hideo Kojima knew that this was going to be on a Blu-ray, and so he used uncompressed audio for the entire game. And so he bragged in interviews that they used up the entire storage capacity of the Blu-ray. Well, good for you. You used up an entire storage capacity of a Blu-ray just by not compressing the damn audio. Anybody could do that.
Half of that would have been the songs on the iPod, which was a ball ache to get and configure.
True.
I bet.
And
Like, there's so many songs on the iPod that just like you can listen to it, yeah, but it doesn't immerse you. And there was, oh man, yeah,
and then like you'll notice we were talking about the codec. One of the things you could argue is like great, it's so high quality, it's different than the other ones. It shows this next generation leap is the fact that when the characters are talking, there's a real-time sound equalizer on the screen that actually shows you like the pitch and the I don't know what the proper technical term is for it, but you know, you can see the sound waves like going up and down based on how they're talking. And in the past games, in Metal Gear Solid 1 and I guess 3 didn't have it, but at least in Metal Gear Solid 1, they have like it looks like it's measuring the volume of what people are saying as they're talking, but it's
yeah,
completely fake and made up, and it's just like a random pattern that this volume thing does. Okay, so in this one, because they're not using compressed audio and there's like multiple channels or whatever, now you get this thing that goes up and down. What do you do? That's worth
wow.
installing the thing every single time I
It,
want to load.
yeah, I do find this like post-mortem pardoning idea like very silly because you can't fail in so many aspects of the product that you ultimately deliver and then be hailed as a genius for your laziness. I know you do have your criticisms of Kojima. Like, I think in a lot of your articles as well, you do have a great article series called The Long and Dark Road to MGS4 before you criticize it, and it kind of documents how like Kojima really didn't want to make this game, and this is actually something we've seen on a wider basis with some recent kind of content creators on YouTube as well. This idea that they're completely resistant to what they're good at. They don't want to do what they're good at. They don't want to see it through. That people love them for, you know?
Yeah, it's a denial of fan service, but at the same time, Metal Gear Solid 4 is supposed to be the ultimate fan service. I mean, Metal Gear Solid 4 was supposed to bring back all your favorite characters, show what they're like, wrap up all the loose ends, and be this celebration and farewell to, you know, Metal Gear Solid. And this is what you get. You get the most depressing slap in the face. Here's Meryl, but she hates your guts. Here's this character, but he's just not what you remember. Here's Shadow Moses, but it's covered in snow, and all you get to fight in it are these fucking orbs with arms that are the least charismatic thing I've ever seen in a video game. It's
So dumb. Like, I do remember feeling a hint during the boss battles of like the weird thing about like MGS 1, 2, 3, they 3 gave the illusion of an open world, but it did it well.
I would argue it doesn't do it
It
that
did it
well, but it does.
it did it better than 4.
Yeah, there are some parts in Metal Gear
Uh,
Solid 3 where you kind of get into the mentality of pathing where you want to go and how you want to approach things. And if nothing else, the environment is rich enough that you want it to be an open world, and you kind of can suspend your disbelief and play as if it is.
the challenge is there in the right ways. Like, it's a bit of a puzzle. You've got to get here, you've got to solve this puzzle and do this when you're there, like in MGS2 when you've got to find all of those C4s and freeze them, and you've got to sneak around all the guys, but you felt like you had options, whereas like MGS4 throws all these guns at you that basically function exactly the same, that you don't really get to use in the manner you'd expect. And it's little things like the fact that Snake can't even push his back up against a wall anymore.
Yeah.
There's not even a proper cover system when it's trying to masquerade as a shooter, when games like Gears of War and Uncharted were out at the time. When you could do that in the previous Metal Gears. And the enemy AI didn't seem too great. Now, I'll admit that in MGS5, they kind of did fix it a little bit, but that doesn't compensate for the soulless story. And if that's what he was going for, that like Snake is meant, going back to that video as well, that Snake is meant to be old, he's meant to be jaded, you're meant to feel that way with him, and like the director does with the series, and I'm just like, again, you know, oh, just fuck off, you know? It's like that scene kid sat in the corner, like,
My parents are really rich. I live in a mansion, and so I play in a band because they don't understand me. Here's my poem about how society betrayed me. You applaud. I am triggered. Paying attention to me now? Good. I hate you. It's called Fuck You, Crawl in My Skin.
Oh my God, that is brutal. But I think you're right. And the thing that gets me is, this is sort of a central criticism of this video and of the people, everybody I've heard, like, because I don't want, it's the video perfectly sums up what people who love the game and don't question it say. It's a highly real.
that's
I'm gonna go back.
That's why it's misleading. It's misleading.
I want to go back to the video, not because I hate this guy or the video per se, but because it's 2017 and this guy just barely regurgitated all the arguments that I've heard throughout the years, just praising the game blindly. But that's sort of like you just barely said, the mood of the game being so emo and stuff. Kojima, once you understand the creative process, I wrote an article, I don't know if you've ever read it. It's called From Nothing. But it's it's about the fact that the choices that a creator makes when he's writing a story, they get ignored once the thing is released, because people try to apologize for the logic of the world without realizing that the logic of the world is 100% at the mercy of the author. And so, okay, Metal Gear Solid 4 is depressing. Okay, Solid Snake is old and the world is bitter and war-torn and stuff. Does that actually need to be the case? If you're going to argue that it's brilliant because, oh, these characters would have gotten older and they would, Meryl wouldn't like Solid Snake anymore, and Johnny, the guy who got the shit kicked out of him in Metal Gear Solid 1, and he was a joke character, a running joke, literally, he becomes the hero that trumps you and shows off and wins Meryl's heart and marries her at the end as a biggest fuck you ever in video game history. That, you know, Johnny marries Meryl at the end and you're at, like, or you're not at her wedding or whatever, but it's,
you can have a depressing story and do it well.
you can have the depressing story and do it well, or you could just say, no, Snake. You could say Snake isn't old. What? Oh, I thought rapid aging process and clones was blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
We live in a place.
There was no reason for Snake to be old other than to add a really annoying gameplay mechanic.
Nanomachines can stop people's hearts, and people can turn invisible, and Vamp can get shot in the head and come back to life. But for some reason, we really need to respect the fact that Snake gets old and wrinkly, you know, really fast. It's like,
that's good. That's very dissonant, isn't it?
yeah. Do people not understand that all of the facts of this world are in service to an agenda? There's no actual logic to this world. It's whatever Kojima wants it to be. So if it's depressing, it's not that Kojima somehow is bound by the rules of this world that, oh, well, I guess Snake just has to be old. I want him to be young and cool again, but, you know, that can't happen. It's like, no, everything that happens, the fact that, you know, him being old is obviously the most obvious thing, because if you actually follow the history of what fans want, it's like a parallel universe that goes in stride with the series. There's what Kojima decides to do, but then there's what fans have wanted, and they're two different narratives. The Metal Gear Solid 1 lets you play as Solid Snake, and it's awesome. Metal Gear Solid 2 lets you play as him for a little bit and then takes him away. Metal Gear Solid 3, again, don't get to play as Solid Snake. Now, okay, you get to play as Solid Snake again. He's old, and not only is he old, but his spirit is gone. His heart is gone. And the argument in stuff like this, and the argument I've seen over and over, is that no, his spirit is stronger than ever because he is old and yet he's still doing the mission. You see, so that takes extra determination and extra. We should give. It speaks even louder that he's a passionate believer in his mission because he's doing it despite the fact that he's old and miserable. And it's just not the case. He is so haphazardly dragging his feet along. And again, there's a way to write it in a way where we do get excited about his mission. But this goes out of its way to steal that.
Yeah, it really does. I will admit, there are moments of elation in MGS4. There were bits I was really into, but they were, 5 minutes at a time out of, like, hours and hours of slog. And that isn't the way that those games were constructed prior. So, like, when you're crawling through that radiation corridor, you're like, no, Snake can't fucking die. No, it hurt. I remember being a kid and like fucking kneeling because it was that painful to like mash my thumbs that hard. But then I was thinking the torture scene, because you really like Campbell and you like Merrill, you don't want to die. You want to fucking, like, the stakes were so much higher. Like with
Shadow Moses,
when you're like Shadow Moses, when you're on the electric the electric crucifix and you've got a mash circle and it's so difficult and you're mashing away the button to not like to recover your health because you don't want to let Campbell or Merrill down, like, and that it actually really hurt. That was genius.
And from a gameplay, I just want to say that from a game design point of view, even if you don't care that much about the characters in the story, that torture sequence is what determines whether you get the good ending or the bad ending in that game. There was multiple endings, so even there was this extra stake that if you did it wrong, if you gave up, there was consequences, even just from your pride as a gamer. It was like you didn't do it.
Exactly. And there's so much hidden content to find that's worth it in MGS1 because it's this very it was geniusly structured. And then in MGS4 again, you just don't have those same stakes. The hidden content doesn't feel worth it. And I remember the plot, and you remember in MGS2, I think it's the post-credits dialogue where they mention something, we were behind it the whole time. And it goes into science fiction horror for a tiny little bit. I remember getting shivers down my spine at the mention the Patriots were behind this entire thing. And those post-credit sequence,
Yeah.
And then basically you get to MGS4, who the fuck are the Patriots? He's gonna blow my mind, this author. Were they fucking aliens? Were they ghosts? Like, does magic and psychic powers actually exist? Like, this is gonna be so mind-blowing, man. This is what he's been building. Oh, it's just an AI. This personality-less AI that you don't even get to talk to.
Yeah. I mean, and then if you just look at the...
it was a computer that,
it's not even like a HAL 9000 kind of computer where you, like, talk to it.
That would have been amazing.
And it's like, oh, I'm fucking GW. Like, what do you want to ask me? And it's like, and he just, it'd be like, I don't know if you've ever watched the movie, The Network, but it's this awesome old movie. And there's a character in there who basically is a representative of globalism and of all this sort of cynical, high-level, elite world control sort of thing. And he gives this speech to the main character that just shuts
Yeah.
you down and puts him in his place. It's like this is the villain, but by the end, you feel helpless in front of it because you just realize how fucking smart and diabolical it is. And here, it's the opposite. The entire point of the AI and the system, as they kept calling it, is that there is no good reason for anything to be happening. War is just a cycle. It's a part of a business model, and nobody is even invested. It's just a generational, self-perpetuating conflict without meaning. And that's like the heart of the whole fucking game, is the fact that none of this means anything.
But you never even see the results of that. You never even get to this you don't even see a businessman with a bunch of cash.
Yeah, it's true.
You don't get how it affects the human population. You don't go anywhere. That bit in Europe, right?
Yeah.
That bit in Europe where you just walk around the street and you get lost and there's nothing to do and you don't.
That's an interesting criticism, because it's like, I would prefer the game just not do a depressing post-apocalyptic world. But if you what you're saying is that if you did do it right, you would have this sense of the morality of the world and why this matters, even if the system doesn't have any like purpose, and it's just sort of a mindless, all-consuming pattern. You could still show the winners and the losers and the struggle of everybody in that world. And the closest thing you get is in that first city where there's these rebels who are moving in and they're getting chopped down by the PMCs all the time. And I guess you could sympathize with them, but at the same time, what do they do to really, win you over one way or another?
That's such a perfect analogy, man. And also every plot twist that ever happened. By the way, like, we're given in the first couple of games where we understand that like, if you're familiar with fantasy or D&D, you kind of have high magic settings, and then you have like low magic settings, like Conan or like Thieves' World, where magic, it takes a very long time to prepare, and you have to do the rituals and stuff. So I kind of like to think that MGS for a time was this very like low paranormal setting where people have psychic powers, but they're kind of dubious, and you've got this weird vampire guy, and it's not magic, it's like this low paranormal setting where you don't quite know how the world works, and they can bend the laws of physics and reality ever so slightly. And it was fucking genius because it gave you a sense of the world. It's this awesome espionage, very near future alternate history setting that's very close to our world with a few little tweaks. And there's people with weird powers, but it's never quite too much that it blows you completely the fuck out. And then, oh no, that was all nanomachines.
Oh yeah,
nanomachines. Yeah, nano my ass. Like, all the thing was nanopunk.
Yeah.
Are you fucking joking?
It's just the magic fairy dust that gets sprinkled on everything, and
just have Vamp be a vampire. Just have Psycho Mantis be a psychic.
Yeah, there's a sense that it's like, careful what you wish for, because people wanted explanations for that, and now here's your explanation. And did you expect something that was going to be grand and poetic and have all sorts of meaning behind it? Because it's the opposite. And then I don't know, does the video even get into the fact that nanomachines are the explanation for everything? I feel like he just ignored that in his video.
Yeah, I feel like he ignored that completely. Like, and with Raiden and the way the direction they went with it, I personally, and people, you and me actually, because of course I've read and enjoyed your articles. Raiden, I played that game as a 12 to 14-year-old boy, so I didn't have a problem with Raiden.
Right. Okay.
he let me see how bad a snake was for someone's eyes, because when I was that age, I was the rookie. I thought Raiden was cool. And then they bring him back as this, like, weird cyborg ninja, and it's like, you didn't need to do that. Have normal Raiden and just bring back Gray Fox or something, you know?
I'm going to disagree with you, but
Okay.
because for me, I guess I was a couple years older, and so I played Metal Gear Solid 1 first, and I was dying to play Metal Gear Solid 2 for all the reasons that Metal Gear Solid 1 had set up. And so for me, Raiden was the complete kick in the nuts. I didn't like anything about him. And the fact that he
If you were 12, would you have the same objections?
I guess it would depend whether I'd played Metal Gear Solid 1 and that had set the bar for me or not. Because for like Metal Gear Solid 1 does not set up anything that would lead you to believe that Metal Gear Solid 2 would come out the way that it did. And I can see why somebody would come in and play Metal Gear Solid 2 with kind of a clean slate mentality and just accept and enjoy playing as Raiden, and accept the fact that he is the rookie and look up to Snake. That was kind of the pitch for why you should be able to play as Raiden. But what happened then was obviously the backlash to Raiden got stronger, and people wanted to come back and play as Snake. And so at some point, Hideo Kojima said in interviews that he was going to make people love Raiden. And so this was his what would you call it? His strategy for how to make Raiden cool was just to straight up make him Gray Fox, just to make him Cyborg Ninja. It's like he didn't actually take what made Raiden, unloved and fix the problems. He just turned him into a different character that we already loved. And so that too is like, if you loved Raiden back in the day, you're going to be sad to see him as this mangled robot who's all speaking in a gravelly voice and trying way too hard to be edgy and emo and like angsty. And if you
It even rained the day I was born. You were the lightning in that rain. Really?
I can't believe he used that. By the way, I can't believe he used that clip as a good thing in his video. Like, that is what you're going to pick out. If of all the lines in the game, you'll pick out that cheesy fucking one-liner that barely translates from Japanese, because of course Raiden means lightning in Japanese. But so the pun is lost, and it's just, I cringed so hard when I heard that the first time, and I still do. And it's like, if there's anything you could sum up the bad writing in Metal Gear Solid 4, aside from the huge sections where it's just monotone rambling of characters, like Naomi in the science lab explaining.
In MGS1, you're interested in every single thing that they tell you. You're not in MGS4.
No, in MGS4, they take their sweet time boring you to death, and on shit that doesn't matter. On shit like, here's how the Fox Die virus transformed into a Fox Alive virus, and then
we get it.
It's like, okay, you could mention that in passing.
By the way, and fuck all the retcons. Give me my Chinese Mei Ling and give me my fucking English Naomi.
Yeah, that's brutal. And that's another example.
They retcon all this shit, and it's like, fuck off. Like,
what?
I loved Chinese Mei Ling.
Yeah.
She was great. Why did you make her this boring generic American? Like,
exactly.
Not that Americans are generic and boring, but Mei Ling was Mei Ling.
That particular Mei Ling and Naomi, they are generic. Like, America has like 15 or whatever, however many different accents within it in the different states. Why did they just sound like
glad-
generic Americans here?
Hello, this is Nastasia. You like cigarettes, yes? Okay, in MGS4, if she showed up, would be, hey, how's it going, Snake?
I wish.
I'm gonna sip me some fucking Budweiser, and we're gonna light up some camels, yeah? Like,
I wish it was, because I love Texas accent. I love Southern accents. This is the
so do I, but not,
non-regional.
you don't replace the character with that, you know?
it's a lack of respect for the character, and then it's also they don't replace it with anything that's equally interesting. Like you could make it so that one person has a New York accent, another person has whatever accent, but it's just this non-regional sort of generic TV personality accent. But anyway,
Yeah,
it's like,
don't get me wrong, those actors are obviously talented. They did both, and they did get the same actors, but it isn't.
but what does it matter to Hideo Kojima that this person has an English accent? He doesn't even, in Japan, they don't even like they could do a Japanese person imitating an English accent, but it really doesn't matter to them. They all just speak in Japanese, and they speak correct Japanese. So he's just going out of his way to fuck over English audiences by removing this accent that everybody loved, and he knows everybody loved it. Nobody ever complained ever about Naomi or Mei Ling. Well, I think somebody later on went and pointed out that Mei Ling shouldn't have a Chinese accent because she wasn't actually from China.
Off, it added to a charm. That's all you want to say to her.
Well, and
like the author of that article, it's like, fuck off, it added to a charm.
Plus, you don't know. I even as a writer, I would argue you could make a perfectly good reason for why she would have a Chinese accent, even if she was raised in America, because her parents might have taught her Chinese most of her life. And
or the military might outsource or have alliances with countries to tackle someone in-house.
I mean, bilingual. Like I've met people who were raised in Canada who have Indian accents, or they have, French accents or whatever, because that's just the community they lived in and the family they lived with. So there's no good explanation except, I don't like you to have.
It's little things as well, yeah. Mei Ling's in it, but she isn't, because you don't even get to call her to save. You could say, Mei Ling's hanging out with Sunny, and they're both learning programming together, and they are living it. And it would have been a little touch like that. A little touch that would have been like, you'd be like, "Aw," and it would have made you feel connected. You know?
Yeah. They could have made like a cameo at least in the codec calls. There's so much room for the way they set up the codec calls. Kind of got me excited because it was like, wow, we actually have like full resolution video of these characters. And now, granted, that takes a lot of resources for a team to animate and make, on-screen video of these characters talking to you. But at the same time, if you're going to do that, don't disappoint us by just having Otacon be the guy you have to call for everything.
In a chair.
And then
like reshuffles his glasses every now and then to go head north.
And but I mean, to be fair, you can jiggle Rose's tits around if you shake the controller and you call her for psychological evaluation throughout your mission. Like,
do you even get to that you can I remember this being a criticism in a magazine, actually. Like, she tells you your status by something you could do by just, I don't know, checking the gauge to the left of the screen.
Like, that's another thing. Why would you put in this fully animated psychologist in your support team? It reinforces the whole theme of the psychological warfare. The game was supposed to originally be pitched as being this deeply psychological game where you would actually, like, the game mechanics would actually reflect your psychological status. It's like, what is that game where your character actually becomes insane and you know, it's the gameplay starts to change accordingly.
Is it Eternal Darkness Sanity?
Yeah, I believe that's the, It's like it almost felt like maybe you get to that level. The game is Metal Gear has always been willing to play with your mind. Psycho Mantis changes what you perceive, and
The
the
sorrow.
sorrow changes what you
And you have to think
you
outside the
question
box.
what's
yeah.
real or not. And Metal Gear Solid 2, obviously, the whole thing with like, I need scissors 61 and like turn off the game console now, and it's like,
That was fucking terrifying, I'm not gonna lie.
yeah. And so you have these epic psychological moments, because the one of the brilliant things that Metal Gear has done is try to communicate how mentally stressful it would be to be a special agent deep under, behind enemy lines.
Oh,
and
yeah.
and these, not only are you on this mission, but the enemies you fight specialize in terror, and they specialize in fucking with your psychology. And now we have Metal Gear Solid 4, which is actually advertised as being a psychological war.
Even when they didn't, like, when you kill Sniper Wolfe, she was charismatic. You didn't necessarily want to kill her, but she was trying to kill you. And then, like, you go, and then Otacon like, he basically has a conversation, like, Otacon is like, she isn't a bad person. And you're like, she fed the wolves, she was nice to Otacon, and you really wonder if you did the right thing when you kill her.
It's a shame that you have to kill her, and it's a bittersweet thing, but that would be a perfect example of how you do bittersweet the right way.
Yeah, or Sorrow, when you fight the Sorrow and he sends every enemy you have killed at you. And then you basically have to do the cyanide pill thing. That's thinking outside the box,
Yeah.
And like they send all that at you, this psychological, like, warfare. But in MGS4, all the villains are fucking cartoons, man.
Yeah.
And they never felt like it in the old games. Like, I get that they were hammy, but that's different to a cartoon.
Yeah.
You know?
What are these bosses even like? They're a parody. If you wanted to, like, there's the reaction of the fan who just wants to have epic bosses, like the old games, and you expect a sequel to try to up the ante and at least match what the previous games did. But it's hard for me to even find the words to explain how disappointing the bosses in Metal Gear Solid 4 are, because
they're a good concept executed very poorly due to the fact that the game engine itself isn't particularly rewarding.
Wow.
And the setup isn't,
Yeah, I would say you have a point, but even the concept. Tell me what you think the concept is of those characters, and like what you said. It's a good concept, but it's basically executed poorly. And I'm wondering, like, what would you say the concept of these bosses actually are?
Okay, so there's 4 of them, and they're the Laughing Beast unit or something like that. Beauty and the Beast, right? So it's these women, yeah, and the guy went into that in his video. He went into what they're supposed to be, but ultimately we are presented with what they are not, just due to the failures of the game to set its own exposition and have us invested in it. So you've got Laughing Octopus, who is, and he does say they are an amalgam and an homage. Laughing Octopus, like, she hides in the house, but you can miss stuff and the fight isn't that good, but if by then you've leveled up Drebin, you just shoot her in the face, and then at the end you have this weird thing where you become a photographer, and you photograph their tits
as they're they're about to die from the horrors of war that they've experienced. It's one of the most ethically fucked up things, but not in a way that admits that it's ethically fucked up.
I mean, yeah, I get that they're sexy.
Yeah.
I get that they're sexy and stuff sexy underneath the outfits, and that they're the Beauty and the Beast unit, but you'd think they would say something like all the others do in the original games, like, you're the legendary fucking Solid Snake, I'm blah 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 blah, and this is what I think, here's my political angle, and stuff like that, and you just don't get that. They're just,
oh god.
And the whole nanomachines control thing with all of the soldiers, that's never really explained in a way that you're shown how it affects any of them. And like,
Okay, I'm gonna go back to the concept of these things, because this is something that I find it's difficult to communicate, and this is something I took a long time getting through my MGS4 analysis on my site, and I didn't end up, even nearly getting through the whole game, and I wanted to make comments on and articles about. But the concept of them, you said it correctly. They're an amalgam, and they're an homage, right? But that's in name, like laughing octopus.
yeah.
Okay, so they have the name of an amalgam, but where is the spirit of the amalgam?
Hang on a minute. You find Naomi in that hut, don't you?
Yeah.
Why the fuck didn't Laughing Octopus have Naomi tied up to some device? And then you're like, oh shit! And then you've got to like find her when she's hiding.
Yeah, they could have made the fight more interesting by integrating Naomi instead of divorcing it from her.
Psychological warfare as well, like if there was more of a system where like this is we'll analyze how your opponents are thinking and they're reacting in a certain way, and that could have been a really integral codec element of the game, right?
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, I mean that sounds interesting. The psychological warfare is supposed to be like she's laughing at you as you're fighting her, and she's laughing octopus, and okay, there you go. You've got the fight already. She's camouflaged, she hides, and she's an octopus, and she laughs. It's like, to me, it's the most basic, uncreative way of doing the quote unquote amalgam. And it's like, I even appreciate the fact that that the octopus angle, like, because there are octopuses that can actually camouflage themselves. You have the octo camo. It's using that theme intelligently in that sense. But
the octo camo barely works.
The octo camo, gameplay wise, it works pretty well if you sit still and you lay down, right?
When someone walks past you, like, who the fuck is that? So I was like, well, what's the point of this if it doesn't even, like, the MGS3 camouflage system worked better in my personal experience.
Huh. Yeah, I fiddled around with it, but Metal Gear Solid 4 has such a what would you describe it as, being directionless gameplay, that it's like, oh, do you want to be a first person shooter, or not necessarily first person, do you want to be a shooter, or do you want to be a stealth game, do you want to be the kind of stealth game where you have to tactically move from point A to point B and time your movement, or do you want to be the kind of stealth game where you crawl like an inchworm along the ground while you're perfectly camouflaged, and that's how you get through levels? It's like,
it was just so, it was directionless because neither element worked particularly well. When you kill one of the bosses, hey, this is Dribbin. Oh, she was an orphan. She was an orphan, and she was sold into a cannibalistic slavery tribe. And then, PMCs picked her up. She murdered her entire family. And then, she was sold into the arms trade. She was literally a gun. She was a gun. People, they shoved RPG rockets up her ass, and she then burped. And then she blew up an entire building of other orphans. Do you feel bad yet? Like, if we felt bad during the fight, it would have been okay. If we knew all that when we were fighting her, maybe it would have worked.
Yes, that's exactly it. That's why, like, going back to the concept of these characters, the concept is so weak, and the execution, I would argue, is actually better than the concept, because there's at least some value to be had from fighting a boss that's camouflaged, or that flies around you with this rockets, and the sniper wolf fight in the middle of the snowfield and stuff. That was gameplay wise, it had an interesting core to it, even if it wasn't executed the way you would want it to be. But the concept is so boring, and then Drebin coming up and just killing whatever last bit of interest I had with his boring rant, where, like, and Drebin himself, I almost wonder I've complained about it before, but that is some of the worst voice acting I've ever heard in a video game.
If you could have called him to get your guns, and the whole thing, the Mark III is meant to go off to another country to come back to you with guns and ammo. What?
I guess Drebin is always supposed to be somewhere around. You just don't see him. Oh,
Despite the fact you're covert ops, no one's meant to know. Yeah, like, if there was multiple, like, if you could call Drebin and it was some kind of Patriot AI, that might have been interesting. And it's like, oh yeah, we'll, but maybe if in the middle of a fight, because Drebin airdropping stuff can create noise,
yeah.
that could have been interesting.
Or if you had to like find Drebin in each level, and he's like, or a different Drebin maybe to make it a little more realistic, because there's supposed to be a bunch.
Like the merchant from Resident Evil 4.
Exactly.
What you buying? What you selling? Got a good deal for you, stranger. Yeah. Not to cut you off, man. Sorry. Please carry on.
No, it's hard to find any aspect of this game that isn't set up to disappoint you.
Yeah, I mean, like, you look at a game like The Last of Us, which is bittersweet, is very, you're in this dead world, but you've got that humanity with you, in the form of Ellie, in form of Joel's entire redemption arc. You're exploring this beautiful world, the mechanics work really well, you're very invested in everything that's going on. Like, that, yeah, it's a slog in terms of Joel has this one last-ditch mission to try and find some redemption, and, like, there's the good slog and the bad slog. I'm trying to think of, like, a comparable game.
Yeah, I don't know what to compare it to either, because it's, unlike Last of Us, this has prequels. Like, I mean, it has a whole series behind it that sets up your... So it's like, what would be an equivalent to a series that has such a triumphant legacy and such a history of delivering what people want? I mean, Metal Gear Solid 2 obviously completely betrayed what people wanted, but even then,
I still thought it
managed
well.
to find a new audience and managed to succeed and win over people in spite of going against what people wanted. But even so, basically, it has a history of kicking ass and giving people what they wanted. And Metal Gear Solid 4 obviously does have a huge following. It has people who love it and will die before they'll admit that there's something wrong with it.
Can we get to how, like, Revolver Ocelot, he's just fucking ridiculous.
Right. And that's the thing, is that he's got this, that's a character with as much history as you will ever get in a video game. Metal Gear Solid 1 comes out as this extremely charismatic, like, you have to love him even though he is a fucking rapist, torturing psychopath who strings up an old man with C4 all around him. And it's like, that's how you fucking win over a crowd. You just make him so interesting. And now you look at him again and he's just a clown.
Yeah, like when you first see him, this is the greatest handgun in the world, and how tense it is when you're like Baker, and that boss fight is so, like, my palms are sweating. Same with the Raven fight and stuff. And even MGS3, like, the pain was a bit silly, but he was still cool.
He did have his own,
like in MGS3, he's one of the more ridiculous bosses.
MGS3 had the whole James Bond-esque motif that sort of covers up any of the flaws. It's like, this is ridiculous, but you're also basically James Bond fighting.
You're loving it. Yeah, you're loving it. And then with the end in the jungle and the like, that was really good. And in MGS2, I remember them, like Fortune, Fat Man, Vamp, they were pretty memorable. And then Solidus, like the whole president thing, whatever. But you know, it came across, the silly bits came across as part of the charm. Whereas the silly bits in MGS4 aren't charming. They just make you feel bad.
Did you? I'm not going to expect you to have watched it, but have you watched the animation I made making fun of Revolver Ocelot. I made a Flash animation years and years ago.
Oh man, I think I may have missed that.
No,
I'm
that's
sorry.
fine because I didn't even try to promote it that much. It's this animation that it basically the explanation. The joke is that Metal Gear Solid 4 got delayed before it was released. It was delayed, I think, a couple months or almost a year. And the joke is that it was delayed so that they could make the trench coat physics better on Revolver Ocelot. And it kind of culminates with this commentary on that stupid fucking fight where he's controlling the system and everybody's kneeling over and he's like using fucking.
That's never explained or used
He's
again.
using
is
his
it?
damn fingers as if they're a gun because he just points at something and goes bang. He actually says the word bang, bang. And that's how he blows up like helicopters and stuff because he's got such mastery of the system in his neural cortex in his own body that he can point at stuff and say bang and the thing will blow up.
I mean, I remember in MGS2, right? MGS2, he came back, and like he was possessed by Liquid Snake, but he had the accent. It was Liquid Snake.
Yeah.
And you're like, you bastard. And then he's like, yes, brother. And it was awesome. And if that was in MGS4, and the way that they, like, I think the voice actor, did he die?
No. Well, Cam Clark definitely did. Cam Clark did Liquid Snake's voice in English, but I think that the Japanese Liquid Snake voice died or something like that.
Right.
And so it was like some bullshit logic of that's why we can't have that in the English version. Because
if Cam Clark was at the end of MGS4, right? You know when he's like, yes, and stuff like that would have added to it.
It would have at least fixed that weird.
But it's the same thing with throwing out the accents of everybody. It's like we're not fighting Revolver Ocelot. We're fighting Liquid Snake. So just give us Liquid Snake in Ocelot's body. That it's ridiculous, but it's part of the charm.
Yeah. I would say that's fair. We accept a level of ridiculousness in Metal Gear Solid games. There's no doubt that the games can be ridiculous. The question is whether it's charming, whether it wins you over, and whether it hooks you and makes you want more. And Metal Gear Solid 4, granted, on a meta level, Kojima is trying to kill the series and end people's interest. He doesn't want people asking for more.
You've talked about this a lot. Would you actually like to go into that a little bit more? Because some people may be unfamiliar with your opinion on this.
So this is basically the only way I can look at the series. I struggle to look at it through your eyes as just a fan who wanted a good game because I'm so used to looking at it from this jaded Kojima point of view where he, like you said, he did not want to make this game. So instead of making an awesome game that gives everybody what they want and wraps up the whole thing and says, boom, I'm walking away. You know, this is it. Bye. He instead tries to sabotage everything in the game to the point where you won't want another sequel. So he's actually trying to subvert the game while still giving it's so bizarre. It's like that's why I call it a meta gear. It's just he
hates the people who love him.
He hates the people who love him because they keep holding him prisoner in this cycle of making Metal Gear games that he doesn't want to make. And especially Metal Gear Solid 4, because that's the game where his mission, his objective is to explain things that are just fucking impossible to explain. Vamp's immortality, the Patriots, the whole shebang. He has to explain everything in one game. And these are questions, these are problems that were never meant to be answered. Metal Gear Solid 2's plot holes were never, ever designed from the beginning to be a setup for a sequel where he explains it. A lot of people do that. A lot of authors set up mysteries so that they can go back later and solve them. This one was the opposite. These were meant to never be answered, and now Metal Gear Solid 4 had to do it. So he basically went in with a loaded shotgun and said, okay, let's answer these fucking questions. You want them answered? Nanomachines. You want this answered? Nanomachines. You want this answered?
He failed to recognize his own charm. And all he had to do was, toward the end of the game, like, the closer you get to this weird AI, if that was the angle he went to, make the AI just a mindfuck, and we'd be happy. The Patriots are bad, they're mindfuckery to the max. Now we've killed them, now everyone's happy. That's all he had to do.
Really, yeah, you add a layer of charm to it all, and instead he added a layer of what would be a good word to do?
Middle finger. A
There's
layer,
a layer
of middle finger.
and there's also a layer of just depression is really what it is. It's,
yes.
I'm depressed that I have to go through the microwave corridor. I'm not excited by it. I'm depressed that, you know, I have to, I'm in this proxy war between the PMCs and the rebels. You know, it's not.
Yeah, it's like, I'm making all this money, and people love my creative genius. And, you know, they just want me to wrap up the series that I started. Fuck them. You know, like, okay, give us a good MGS4, everyone's happy, then when that makes bank, critically and monetarily, because everyone was going to buy it, you knew it, then you can make Policenauts 2 or 3 or whichever one he went back to. Like, I imagine that, like, because he was involved with PT, wasn't he?
That was his game.
I can imagine, like, after that got, like, Konami really, like, if he wanted to make Konami the villain and take out all this angst in a pseudo-narrative, like, allegory, parallel, metaphor, he would, like, just basically, Konami are pricks, I'm going to, in my writing, embody them, they're gonna make these fucking bumfuck decisions, and, you know what, you'll hate them just as much as I do, because they'll fuck the world over, but you know what, Snake kills them, because creative genius wins out. That's the way a normal, like, person who doesn't hate his own success would think.
I don't want to shill my book too hard, but this is basically what the book ends up being about that I'm writing, is the weird way in which, you know, he doesn't have, it's not like American creators where an American creator, if you're a genius, you can give people what they want. You have freedom. You can go anywhere. You can quit your job, and the next day you can get hired somebody else, because talent is this resource that gets distributed in a free market. In Japan, it doesn't work that way. If you're talented and you're Japanese and you work for a Japanese company, you are their bitch, and they will milk you until the day you die. So
right.
And this, you can see this all over the place. There's like the person who created like Dragon Ball, like the person who created like Shigeru Miyamoto, and all these other people. You become like a mascot for a company. They will exploit your name, but you don't actually have freedom to do what you want, and you can't quit your job.
I see.
And so Hideo Kojima is trapped in Konami essentially, and this is something that's interesting. Is I only learned about recently, is that even after he got fired from Konami now, with, you know, or quit or got fired, however you want to say it, he departed from Konami after Metal Gear Solid 5. He basically like couldn't even get health insurance or like any sort of insurance after that, because there's a weird incestuous relationship between all these different corporations, where basically if you get fired from a company, they can basically just pass on a note to the next company and say, don't give this guy a chance. And
I'm not gonna lie, right? Here's the thing with Kojima. If all that is true, and I don't doubt it is, I believe it is true. Obviously, Japan, as much as we value their creative zen, we don't necessarily have comparable cultures, but he fucking loves America and he speaks English fucking, you think if Hideo Kojima went, okay, kids and wife, you're gonna move to America, you're
I would
gonna
argue
love it. I'm
I
gonna
would
love
argue
it.
he could do that, and he could find success in America, but he doesn't speak English. Um,
I thought he did.
he doesn't, and that's one of the huge ironies of the series, actually.
That's so weird. He's written this American series, and whenever I've seen him talk, he's spoken English, but he must have been dubbed over well.
He does actually do interviews where he always has a translator with him, but sometimes they edit it so that you see as if he's talking English. But no, he speaks Japanese. He's got extremely broken English. If he ever tries to, it's kind of a running joke when he tries to speak English. And the irony being, of course, that he worships Hollywood movies, which are English.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, people have a lot of misconceptions about Hideo Kojima. And this is part of what my site is about, and part of what my book is about, is trying to get people to understand he's not actually a greedy businessman who's trying to exploit, a series that has a popular name.
I don't think. No, yeah, I don't think he's a greedy businessman at all.
He's trapped in a weird reality where he has no creative freedom, and yet he's in charge of something that makes millions of dollars. So Metal Gear Solid 4 does actually encapsulate his tragic sort of struggle, to the metaphor being the system that is in the game, the SOP system that controls this conflict. Is a meaningless proxy war and an endless conflict. That's a metaphor for his life at Konami, where he has the conflict is the video game competition, the other video game companies, the PMCs being video game companies. The endless repetition of renewed conflict for no real reason except to make money is a commentary on the video game industry. And so there are layers of commentary in Metal Gear Solid 4 where you can look at it and say, this is genius because, it's supposed to be depressing. It's supposed to kill off this series once and for all. It's supposed to end the system. Like, Metal Gear Solid 4 doesn't really have a villain. Revolver Ocelot, it controls the system, but there's nothing really personal about why you need to stop him, and he's not threatening to launch nukes like in every other game. There's always a nuclear threat. It's much more about ending this system, that until the system ends, conflict will renew itself forever.
So you start to understand where his kind of brain power or psyche was when he was writing this game, and the way that he represents that in his writing. That would make a lot more sense, and maybe that's hard for us as a Western audience to wrap our heads around, because from the get-go, MGS was sold as an American fucking setting with a style that kind of...
Oh, it feels totally American. It doesn't feel Japanese.
It would be like us being in that situation, but writing Japanese characters based on Japanese history and Japanese looking and feeling and...
Absolutely. And it's such a good job that if you didn't see Japanese names in the credits, you would think this was an American game.
Oh, yeah, you think, fucking like... oh, okay. I was gonna throw out a random American company, but the only thing that comes to mind is like Rocksteady or Naughty Dog.
Rockstar, I mean. So like and I actually talked to Jeremy Blaustein, who is the translator for Metal Gear Solid 1, as part of the research for my book. And so, and he lives in Japan. He knows the culture. He knows the corporate culture and the everyday culture. And when you talk to people who actually live in Japan and work in the games industry like that, you realize that it's a completely different world than American. And so that's actually one of the things that I want to get into more. I almost feel like I should write more about it on my site, is just trying to educate people on how different Japanese culture and corporate culture is than what people assume. But Metal Gear Solid was aimed basically at Americans, and it was supposed to obviously revolve around all these American military situations and stuff like that. So it is very easy to see why the average fan of even a really big fan of Metal Gear could play the entire series but miss this Japanese weirdness going on behind the scenes.
Absolutely, man. No, I'm really glad you brought that up, because we've kind of gone from like responding and kind of bringing how we thought we could improve the game overall and our problems with it to like the maybe again, like you're very good at this because this is very overlooked, but the meta but you know, that really is a meta concept that is constantly running throughout this game, that whilst it doesn't give gamers what they want when we look at it from one perspective, it does at least make us understand why
and
it
that's
happened.
the question, is does that forgive the problems?
Does it excuse
and
it?
I don't think it does. Like, I mean, if you buy it as a product, right? You bought it as a consumer. I'm buying this product. It was advertised to me a certain way. It was advertised it was going to be an open world game with destructible buildings and psychological warfare, and it was going to wrap up all these questions. It was going to do a million things that it was going to try to do. Now I paid my money for a product, and what do I get in return? I get this big middle finger, this tone and theme throughout it that's just depressing, and you know, all the complaints that we've talked about, those are still real complaints, and I don't think you should give like a better review score, let's say, to a game that has this bizarre meta commentary that explains why it's so fucked up. It's still fucked up. It's still, and here's the thing, Kojima, again, he had the choice to do it right and to make it charming and to wrap it up in a way that we would have loved, but he still chose to essentially betray and undermine what people wanted. And that's the frustrating part about a game like Metal Gear Solid 4, is that you can explain, a guy like me, a crazy person like me who studies this stuff to the point where you can actually get into the mindset of Hideo Kojima when he's making it. I'm looking at it from a perspective of, oh, okay, I understand why this section, I understand why Drebin gives you the extremely boring, tragic backstory of each of these characters. It's actually there to undermine your interest in the characters. It's not even there to make them more interesting. It's there to make them less interesting. And that, in some ironic, backwards way, makes sense to me. But I'm still also a fan of these games, and I just want them to be fun and good. So I'm looking at it as a fan and saying, this is trash. Where are my good boss fights?
Yeah, understanding how the disaster happened gives you a sort of detached perspective, but it doesn't forgive the disaster.
Right.
So yeah, to wrap it up, I think there's a few creators out there who, like, they're misunderstood for the weirdest of reasons. For instance, you may not be familiar with them, but like Noran Twyla of the Spoonie Experiment, he's obviously not on the same degree as like Hideo Kojima, and obviously Japanese culture, this surprises people, but it is very different to our own.
Yeah, it's
and like they have this like highlight of glowing years, and then they just sort of they want to duck out a bit.
Yeah, and you'll see that in interviews with creators. I like to read interviews with Japanese creators who have been working on a series for like 20 years, because normally in the West you would think, you know, if the guy has been working on a series for 20 years, he must love the shit out of that series, and that must be the only thing he wants to do. But the opposite is true in Japan, where these people, they get some success, but it's not really their baby. They don't get to control it the way they want to, and they do end up having these warped perspectives. You can see it if you pay attention and you read interviews with Japanese creators. You can see how they're basically over and over. They will ask the fans in the interview. They'll say, you know, I want to say to my fans that, you know, you need to ask the company to let me do something else, because I can keep doing this, but I have a lot of things I want to do besides this. And so, and then Hideo Kojima has done literally that. He's done that over and over. Told fans, I want to work on something else. And he means it. He actually has a bunch of ideas that he wants to do besides Metal Gear. But when everybody's just like, nah, just keep making Metal Gear, just make another one and make it better and make it crazier and make it, give us more of what we want. That's where the bitterness comes in, and where he's like, well, fuck it, I'm going to make another Metal Gear, but this one is going to do this and this one's going to do that. And so he gets into these weird situations where you would think from a Western perspective, he can just do what he wants, but he's actually, he's sort of trapped. And that's kind of where my site commentary begins, and what my book tries to lay out for people is getting into the right mentality to understand the real behind the scenes problems that lead to the messed up situations of Metal Gear Solid and that whole series since Metal Gear Solid 1, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I have looked into before, like shonen or like any manga artist that is considered somewhat independent, the quality of their series starts to drop. And then people are like, what the fuck? You've betrayed me. This series used to be so good, like Bleach, Naruto. It's like these guys have been doing this series every day for like 5+ years. Do you think you would have the creative energy to release a chapter like that every day? Not every day, but you're working on it every day to release it every week. Yeah, you know, humans do need a break sometimes to think stuff over. And that is unfortunate, because whilst Japan is, and it does get lost in translation, it is a land and a people of enormous creativity.
Sure. Yeah.
And creative genius and hard work. But it's that fine line between like passion and I love this, but I just need a break, you know?
And that's where something like, you know, maybe it's an extra shame that something that PT never actually came to fruition, because that was that seemed to be the example you could have looked at and said he's actually doing something different. You can see how brilliant it was. Like
everyone loved it. Everyone loved it. And like if you were that guy, think how much that would have crushed your esteem even more.
Yeah, it's pretty depressing. And I think, you know, that's the theme of Metal Gear Solid 4, is the fact that it's kind of a reflection of his state of depression. I mean, I got a screenshot right here, you know, for the interview. I was looking up different stuff, and I got the screenshot of Solid Snake with the gun in his mouth. You know, I was like, so there's a quote.
I remember the previews. Everybody thought he was going to blow his brains out at the end.
And it would have been awesome if he had, to be honest. It would have been so fucking amazing if he actually had. But there's an interview with Hideo Kojima, and he actually says, this is a quote, "I want Snake to die so that I can move on." And in the interview, whoever was editing the video of the interview showed the gun in his mouth as he's saying that, and it's like, that's Metal Gear Solid 4 for you. He wanted Snake to die so that he could move on to something else, and it's symbolized right there, with him, with Snake with a literal pistol in his mouth, the shittiest way a hero could go out, you know, and he just wants it to end. It's brutal.
I mean, you put a genius behind bars, and they're not going to produce
watch it unravel. I mean, watch everything about it unravel in the odd ways. And this is what I find to be so sad, when I see a video like this in defense of Metal Gear Solid 4, which, by the way, there was a different article written by the Snake Soup called In Defense of Metal Gear Solid 4. It came out a long time before, and it had much better reasons for defending Metal Gear Solid 4 than what this guy is bringing up. But this kind of defense of the game to me is, you see how sad it is to see somebody defending it on this surface level by cherry picking certain things and ignoring all of this other stuff. I could defend Metal Gear Solid 4 as a postmodern, bizarre commentary on Japanese culture and whatever. I could defend it that way. But when I see a defense like this, it just shocks me how uninformed it actually is. Not only from the complaints we've brought up as legitimate complaints about installation times and the mood of the gameplay and all this stuff, but on the deeper level too, where this he's not getting into the real roots of why the decisions were even made the way that they were in the game.
No. Yeah, I totally get that. And again, we have no problem with this this creator. In fact, he makes better videos than the trend chasing vloggers out there. He makes better videos than I make. He's I mean, I'm sure both of us would love to talk to this guy, because even you and me will admit there are moments of like excitement and elation in MGS4, but they are few and far between. But to focus in on them as the only thing that game has in it is misleading.
I hope that he listens to this and makes another video defending Metal Gear Solid 4 after listening to this, because it's not a problem with this guy. It's the fact that he's probably just not aware of what the problems of the game actually were when they were released, and what was promised before the game was released, and all this other crazy shit that went on behind the scenes and stuff. And I feel like if somebody would be informed enough, they wouldn't make a video like that. They would have a lot more it would be a lot more complex, because Metal Gear Solid 4 is a very complex game to try to appreciate, and it's a complex game to criticize, because either way, whether you want to praise it or hate it, it's this divisive, controversial, messed up situation. And I want people to appreciate how complex it is. That's what my mission has been with my website.
Absolutely. What I would like to end on actually is like I like a thin stroke of optimism in some of the discussions, but are you aware of Metal Gear Solid 1? Yeah. Do you know how they recorded that?
I have heard it, but go ahead and say it.
Yeah, alright, so basically this is in the 90s and no one has any idea what the fuck they're doing, but you amass enough talented people who they haven't done all that much other stuff, and they really want to make something fucking awesome, the best it can possibly be. So what do? They all basically go to this house that this studio buys, and it's got no sound booth. It's not even really formatted out as a studio. They just buy this house, there's a kitchen, and there's like a door to a basement, and they either do it in the room next to the basement, or they're in the actual basement. And so they are recording this entire script, right, using stage microphones. They are holding them. They are being that ghetto. And they have to stop every time a car goes past the house. They have to stop and edit out every time somebody is turning a page. They probably don't even have a computer there. They've just got a guy with a preamp, the voice director, and all the actors are gathered together in a room, and they are bouncing off of one another. And to me, and in a lot of other fans' opinion, the best performances and the best game is Metal Gear Solid 1.
Yeah.
Because of how much fucking passion they had. Like David Hayter, and bless his heart, if I met the man, I would shake his hand. I would say, you have no idea idea, like in the hearts of like gamers out there, actors, anyone who play your games, how cool and how much of a good job, and all the rest of the voice actors as well, and the actors, because it was like they were all on a stage, and he wasn't overdoing the Snake voice at that point. He wasn't like doing a self-referential half parody of, oh, right, Snake's this fucking guy. He was just going for it.
I will say this, just not to interrupt too much, but I did talk to Jeremy Blaustein, like I said, and he's the one that translated the script and wrote the English script for the game. He was in the studio, during the recording of that game, and he basically coached all these different actors how they should act in a way that sounded correct to him as the writer of the English voices. He had an idea in his head. Snake should sound like this. This is why he wrote it, like this character that way. And so he basically was involved from beginning to end with the whole English process, the whole English version. And that's why he managed to get such great performances out of all of he wasn't the official like voice capture like director, but he was in the room and he managed to have the input during the recording process for these people. And that's one of the reasons why they sound so human and they sound so real.
I don't doubt that for 1 second. Everyone involved in that project, just to be in this ghetto situation and to just hammer out these fucking stellar performances that have, like, the weird thing about MGS2 is that it is, as you've gone into in your articles, this kind of postmodern, it's different. And MGS3 is this James Bondy awesome, but again, you there's no way to do MGS3 without getting a little cheesy. Right. And MGS4 is the cynical, backward, that we've just talked about. And of course, MGS5. If you've played Peace Walker, I don't blame David Hayter for 1 second for any of this, but I feel like the director, the way he directed in Peace Walker, David Hayter to be, is, man, I don't know what happened. It
sounds a little bit like a self-parody. And I've always said that. I don't know. I've heard other people argue, no, it's as good as ever. I'm like, I don't think you're listening to the same thing I'm listening to. You go back to Metal Gear Solid 1, the original, not Twin Snakes. You go back to the original and you listen to it. It's a world of difference, actually.
Yeah, exactly. And, you can, again, like I mentioned earlier, you can pick up MGS1 20 years later and you can pick it up and you can sense the passion, and it's just as tense and atmospheric as it ever was when you first picked it up. Same with, I'm sure, a lot of the other earlier games, and then, of course, times have passed. David Hayter isn't Snake anymore, and they've shifted it over to Kiefer Sutherland, who, by the way, Kiefer Sutherland, if you've ever watched 24, which is oddly, like, really big in Japan, like, alarmingly big. Like, obviously Kiefer, he is an excellent actor. I don't fault him ever, but Snake is Snake, and I feel like when we just need that original crew. If Kojima's ever to do a different game, that's who we need. But I just find it fascinating and amazing how these people in this basement with these stage microphones gave arguably the best voice acting performance with no studio trust that we've ever seen in any game anywhere.
Absolutely. I think that's a high watermark of the entire history of video games is Metal Gear Solid 1 in terms of voice acting.
Oh, of course. Oh, yeah. And so many other reasons as well. And obviously, our criticisms before, I think for you and me, it doesn't stem anywhere from, like, hatred. It comes from a place of, like, we love this series.
Oh, it comes from high standards. It's the biggest compliment.
Yeah, the standards set by the series.
The biggest compliment you could give is to say, you're the best in the entire world, so, we want it. We want the best from you every single time.
It's when your favorite sports team has a shit season for like 5 years, but you still support. You see that in England with there'll be clubs that played brilliantly in football, soccer for like US Canadian people, and like they play this one excellent season, and this one guy from like the 1950s or 60s or 70s was like, holy shit, these guys are amazing, and they support them no matter what.
Got the legacy
of that one time. Yeah. One thing, I will compare it to a different game, Metal Gear Solid, and how it's progressed. The Witcher series, are you familiar with that?
I've played 3 and I played 2 a little bit.
Witcher 3 is 98% beautiful genius, 2% flawed.
Yeah.
But I think we see the difference in passion and allowance versus the stifled genius that we see. The Witcher 3 is so vast, so like so many elements. Like you don't even consider things like the music, which fits perfectly. How they actually got in this Polish folk band with this huge following in Poland to do the music, and how the sound crew were doing all this crazy stuff to make it authentic, and the programmers. And this is a Polish company; they don't even have that much money, but it's all passion. And it blows my fucking mind that they cranked out this AAA title with like a, what is it, like a 97% rating on Metacritic.
Yeah, and they don't even have that much budget.
No.
No, I think that's a very good comparison, because when it's all about the heart of the developers and their willingness to go the extra mile to satisfy fans, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think fans of The Witcher are almost like, we're satisfied. You delivered such an amazing product. I don't think anyone would complain if that company went on to do a different series after this, because they did such an amazing job. We can always go back and play Witcher 3 again. And that's what you get when you have that freedom for the creators to just let loose.
Yeah. Everyone praised. They're like,
I so hope there's a Witcher 4 someday. I love it.
And then it's like, yeah, The Witcher 3 wrapped itself up, but it left itself slightly open-ended. You got to say goodbye to everyone. And there was so much content and so much to do, and like every voice actor in that as well, and the writers, they knew what the fuck they were doing, and power to them. And it's like, you're happy that CD Projekt Red are now moving on, but you compare it to this company like Konami and Kojima, who like was once loved. It would be a shame to see CD Projekt Red, move to Japan.
Oh yeah. I don't think Western creators could survive if they moved to Japan. I don't think they could function, because I could get into it more. I know we're wrapping up, but I could get into it more. The life in those companies, you are more of a slave than you are a valued employee.
So these high-ranking positions, to make a comparison, it's like comparing it to a lower paid position over in the West.
Yeah, it's like what Hideo Kojima did in that situation is fight with everything he had to carve out a method by which he could still say what he wanted to say and do what he wanted to do, and make his point secretly, kind of between. If you read between the lines, you can see what Kojima was trying to do.
Terry, can I ask you, do you write every day?
I tend to write something every day, yeah.
Yeah, can you like imagine writing such a complicated story within a time limit with the company on your back, and like can you put yourself in his shoes? With the amount of time you maybe would have had. I know that is a question, of course, you'd have to dwell on. Where do you empathize as a writer and creator yourself with the man?
Oh, absolutely. I like to write stuff that's like fiction and write, world building and the same kind of stuff that he does. I don't publish it, but I like to do that same stuff. And I understand the writing process and the creative process. It is hard to imagine being in a situation where your name is on the box, you are doing interviews. You are treated around the world like you are a Western creator, you know, who's free to just quit and go somewhere else or whatever. And companies have to bend over backwards to make you happy because you can always just walk out the door and start your own thing and everybody will follow you and support you. To shift over from that to a mentality where you're trapped in a place, I can't even imagine how bad the internal politics of it all gets. But Metal Gear Solid 5 showed a lot of the ugliness if you followed the behind the scenes news after Metal Gear Solid 5 and why that game isn't completed. A lot of the dirty laundry did actually get exposed. And I think it would just, you wouldn't have any choice but to subvert expectations and to turn ugly with the whole thing at some point.
Yeah, no, I really do dig that. And I also know that it was well documented. I know this is a bit of a side point, but it may be this corporocracy kind of overlord idea actually fits into that, because I remember prior to MGS5, Kojima said he loved the English voice cast. He loved it. He loved David Hayter. He loved Christopher Randolph. He loved Colonel Campbell. He's called Roy. Sorry, I forget. I am sorry.
Paul Eiding, the voice actor?
And
yeah.
Paul Eiding. Yeah, we'll edit that out. Sorry, Paul Eiding. Yeah, he loved all of them and Cam Clark, and and then it was so weird to see him replaced by Kiefer Sutherland, and it feels like when you think about it, that probably was some kind of corporate ruling that he had to roll with in some degrees, rather than any kind of decision I feel like he would have made as a creator. And again, it's not that Kiefer Sutherland is bad, because he isn't. He is very talented, but he isn't Snake.
Yeah,
you know.
I want to know more about how that developed in Metal Gear Solid 5, because I believe that there's a good reason for all of those bizarre choices.
And of course, you and me both, I love 24. It's a great show.
Oh yeah, it's great.
And Kiefer, he's done voice acting before, and he is blown it out the park
Sutherland
with that.
from back in Young Guns.
Yeah,
it's one of my favorite movies.
But he isn't. You don't just take over Snake. I'm trying to compare.
It's the last
game
game in the series. There's only one more time they have to bring out David Hayter. How do you change it at the last possible installment? You know, there's something weird there. There's something that needs to be explained. It hasn't been exposed yet in interviews and whatever, but the decision to change was suspicious, to say the least.
Oh yeah, and everyone felt it. But to wrap up again, the guy's video that, because I have been asking Terry, I've been asking him to come on and talk about MGS4 and our later feelings on it, for quite a while, and because I'm a easily distracted boy, I've been missing every time he's been on, so he's been incredible coming on here and obviously giving me his time. But again, in defense of MGS4, this guy, the Gaming Brit Show, obviously we don't think he's a bad person. We don't hate him. We just disagree on his perspective.
Get back to us.
It would be lovely to talk to him. Yeah, get back to us. Obviously he makes really good videos. He makes better videos.
Do a
than
response
most.
video and say what you think. You know, after you listen to this, I respect anybody who wants to go and discuss Metal Gear and try to get into it and try to unravel it. I don't expect anybody to understand how crazy that series actually is. So I don't hold it against anybody if they have any misconceptions. I want people to be informed, and then I want you to come back and say, you know, if it changed your mind, if it doesn't change your mind, or whatever. That's always kind of the mentality I have when I get involved with discussions about Metal Gear with people, is like, I don't expect anybody to be crazy enough to do the kind of research that I've done, because it's almost not even healthy to obsess over something so much and figure it out on that level. You know, I'm not bragging about how much I know about Metal Gear. It's you know, and so come back. You know, to anybody who's listening, wade into the discussion and give your point of view once you know how messed up it is, and let's all discuss this series in a way that's informed and that's appreciates all the complexity and the nuance that actually is hiding beneath the surface.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, please do. And of course, you know, we're completely open to discussion. And you know, Terry, he's writing a book about Metal Gear, which is unprecedented as far as I know. I don't know anyone who's published an examining journalistic look about, you know, Metal Gear Solid as a series, like an independent author. If you'd like to plug that, please feel free.
Yeah, the title, I'm not going to reveal yet, but it should be coming out this year. The finishing touches are basically done, and it follows Kojima's life from when he was born to when he entered Konami, all the way to 2003. So it's not even his whole career. It's the first part of his career from the release of Metal Gear in 1987 to 2003, when Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance came out, which I consider that to be the first era of his career. And after that, things take a turn, and you get everything after that. So there are definitely books about Metal Gear, and they're usually a fan sort of appreciation, kind of gushing over how much they love the series in a retrospective. But there's nothing like what I'm doing, which is, the book is not about promoting the games and promoting the series as being flawless and just hyping it up. No, it's a look at the tragedy and the weirdness behind the whole series, and trying to get at the roots of why some of this insanity has developed around the series.
Absolutely. I concur. Again, metagearsolid.org. Great read. What we're going to do is we're going to lock Terry back up in his cardboard box, which is his favorite place to write, on his laptop. That's his I'm pretty sure he was born holding a laptop. I'm pretty sure his first sight was a cardboard box, and the first thing that booted up on his laptop was Metal Gear and a picture of Hideo Kojima.
It's my secret.
And so what I would like to do is read his words out loud to him. Which is this is an article he has written, and it is one of the things you can find on his site, which is called The Long Dark Road to MGS4, which is a prelude to his MGS4 articles. It's the second one. But I'd like to read some of the first few paragraphs. So, if this interests you, and it interests me, as I hope it does everyone else, here we go. So, Kojima versus MGS4. As I explained in my article, The Long Dark Path to Metal Gear Solid 4, Kojima's relationship with the Metal Gear series has become increasingly complicated ever since MGS1 raised stubborn expectations about what the series should be in the minds of his fanbase, restricting his creative freedom and eventually forcing him to give in to the demands of the masses. But what evidence is there that Kojima hated Metal Gear Solid 4 and didn't want to work on it? Death threats are awesome. Well, first of all, let's look at his stated motivation for leading the project. This is from CVG, November 25th, 2005. Speaking about why he decided to head the latest MGS game, Kojima revealed that he received a number of death threats, not from CVG, after announcing that he would be less involved in the project. The staff heard about this and got very nervous, said Kojima. We talked today as if it was a joke, but at the time, it was not a joke at all. It was serious. He seriously thought somebody was going to try to kill him, or rather, multiple people. That can't be good for your feelings towards the game you're working on, can it? But that's not all. He didn't want to even make a sequel to Sons of Liberty in the first place because it was a postmodern experiment that wasn't supposed to make sense. That's why he went into the past with MGS4 and tried to hand the project to his team repeatedly, but no, there was no avoiding it in the end. He had to swallow the bitter pill and pretend that MGS2 was supposed to be real, knowing that it would be a painful and unsatisfying experience. However, he wasn't going to suffer silently. And I'll leave you there. So that is Terry's, in my opinion, terrific writing. So much insight that you simply don't find anywhere else on the internet, even YouTube. So please check his site, Meta Gear Solid, out. Would you like to add anything in closing, Mr. Wolfe?
Thank you for inviting me back. We did talk about this when we did our last discussion, and it turns out that there was this video that came out that kind of ignited an inspired need to revisit Metal Gear Solid 4. I'm grateful to anybody who's making videos and discussing Metal Gear Solid 4 still, and I would invite everybody to go check out my articles, check out whatever you can about the backstory behind some of these things, because there's nothing I love more than an informed discussion about Metal Gear Solid and the series, and I think it deserves a really nice deep discussion.
Yeah, we have had a very emotional discussion as well. Of course, about I've particularly mentioned what MGS like. I think everyone gets a sense of the impact it has made on us both.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and of course, thank you to everyone checking this out. This was a discussion, and of course, if you'd like to see more, do indeed let us know.
Subscribe.
Subscribe, please.
Click the links.
Do you know, was it you that said that Christopher Walken was meant to be like half the inspiration for Snake? And he changes it like every other time. It's like, it was Kurt Russell. No, it was Christopher Walken. No, it was Kiefer Sutherland. And who's the new person?
Robert De Niro.
So he's all those guys and then some.
Oh, Kojima.
But I do go back to what did David Hayter say? Something about there's a snake in it. Snake is
the president. Everybody's Snake, really. We're all Snake on the inside.
So thanks for joining in the discussion, man. I'll close it off here. Okay, I'll.
That was a big ass discussion.
Yeah, that was awesome, man.